Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us in this side event to the Green Climate Fund's Private Investment for Climate Conference 2020. This side event is organized and moderated by Convergence. My name is Robert van Zwieten. I'm the Managing Director for Asia Pacific at Convergence, and it's my privilege today to be your moderator in this event. Our warm thanks go to our many friends at the Green Climate Fund for allowing us to have this side event and for enabling us to provide you, our 230 or so participants today, with a better understanding of three specific and practical applications of blended finance through deep dives into the DBSA Climate Finance Facility, the Catalyst's MENA Clean Energy Fund 2, and the work of EarthSpark International. And of course, through these deep dives, also provide you with an update as to how blended finance these days as a financing approach is advancing public and private investment in clean and renewable energy in emerging markets, and by doing so is making strong progress in support of energy transition in this decade of action. With those objectives in mind, we've organized an action-packed hour for you. So without further ado, I'd like to take you quickly through our agenda. I am going to use my few minutes to introduce Convergence to you and perhaps a few slides on blended finance, and then turn over to Spiva Sabanda, the Head of Product Innovation at DBSA, who will present a case study on the DBSA Climate Finance Facility. We then have a panel discussion for about 10 minutes after Spiva's 15-minute presentation, which I'll moderate, featuring again Spiva and Leo Park, the Financial Institutions Manager and Corporate Sustainability Officer of the Private Sector Facility of the Green Climate Fund. And then we'll pivot very quickly into two more presentations by Convergence members. Enes Rumawi, the founder and managing director of Catalyst Investment Management, will present its Fund 2 for 10 minutes. And Alison Archambault will present also for 10 minutes as President EarthSpark International, her company's work in Haiti. And then we conclude with about 8 minutes of Q&A with the audience. You'll agree this is a very tight program, so we want to achieve a lot, and I'll have to be a strict timekeeper. We do invite you, of course, to submit your questions or comments in the Q&A field on the WOFA window, which by this time you probably are quite familiar with. Really, at any time throughout the session, you can do that, and I'll do my best to get to as many as I can in the moderated panel discussion and the Q&A at the very end. At this time, I also need to make a very brief regulatory disclaimer on behalf of Convergence. This is the fine print that they read on the radio in hyperspeed. I will not do that and skip it, but need to make it for regulatory reasons. So, all right, what is Convergence? For those of you who don't know us, we're the global network for blended finance. We have a global membership of public, private, and philanthropic institutions. We, as you would expect, create and generate blended finance data, intelligence, case studies, do an awful lot of training and education. We run an online matchmaking platform for those who seek blended finance and those who provide it. And we do a lot of work in market acceleration. So we make grants in support of the design of innovative vehicles that aim to attract private capital to global development at scale. We have a member community. The three presenters tonight are all members. They're part of a large community of institutions and businesses. They're all dedicated to driving capital to where it's needed most. You'll see a great number of logos on the right, which I think really do not need any further introduction. So the importance of blended finance, very quickly, as we know, there's a $2.5 trillion annual investment gap. Really putting that into perspective, it sounds manageable, but it's hard to get to those numbers. Defining blended finance, just for good order's sake, we really define it as the use of catalytic capital, whether it's from philanthropic or public sources or both, to entice private sector investment to come into sustainable development. So investment opportunities in emerging markets that are aligned with sustainable development goals. And of course, you'll see in the graph the concessional input from the development funding, public or philanthropic, the market rate input from private capital, particularly useful when project risk and or country risk is very high. Three particular elements to blended finance. There's of course the leverage, the impact, and some level of return. These are 2019 numbers, but since 2007, since we started counting, we were ourselves founded in 2016. There's been about $140 billion mobilized to date, with about 4,000 financial commitments and growing every year. This is a great section, but I'll skip it. And I'm going to look to now very quickly pivot to the presentation by Spiwe. And I wanted to invite Spiwe to please turn on your video, your audio, and to share your screen, and look forward to your presentation. Again, Spiwe is the Head of Product Innovation of DBSA, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, and the floor is all yours, Spiwe.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody wherever you're joining us from. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. My name is Spiwe Sibanda. I am the Head of Product Innovation for the Development Bank of Southern Africa. So who is the Development Bank of Southern Africa? We are a development finance institution. We fund infrastructure projects. We focus on key sectors like energy, water, ICT, and transport infrastructure. And we fund deals throughout Africa. So just to come back, thank you very much to GCF and to Convergence for inviting us to share the climate finance facility with us, with the audience. So just to get straight into the presentation for today. So 3 years ago, I think the Development Bank of Southern Africa embarked on discussions, started discussions and looking around to say, how can we as a bank make a difference in Southern Africa in terms of catalyzing green projects? So this is how this idea came about. So what is the Climate Finance Facility? It is a structured finance platform that has an initial debt commitment of 110 million, which is obviously an initiation, a collaboration between the Development Bank of Southern Africa and the Green Climate Fund. So it's a debt facility that we set up to incentivize private investment in low carbon climate resistant infrastructure and in Southern Africa. So when we looked at Southern Africa, we wanted to, first of all, pilot on a small scale. Therefore, the focus for us right now is just to look at our immediate neighbors in South Africa. We are based in South Africa, sorry for those who don't know. So we're based in South Africa. So what we did is we looked at the RAND Common Monetary Union countries, which are Eswatini, Lesotho, Namibia, and we decided we would start with those 4 countries to try and pilot this new initiative. So the intention is to try and catalyze for every $1 US we put in, to try and crowd in private sector funding in maybe between 3 and 5 times. So we have looked overseas at how the Green Bank model has worked, and we have tried to say they catalyze between 3 to 5. So that's what we are aiming for as well. So the instrument that we're using is a long-term subordinated debt, and we offer like a 10-year extension. Particularly for us is to catalyze commercial banks who are somehow challenged by the Basel III requirements and they cannot do longer tenure funding. So that's where we come in and we offer longer tenure. And we have also given them preference, like to say they can exit first, obviously, so that we subordinate our facility. So that's how it's structured. So the evolution of CFF. So for us as a bank, it's not a new concept, this funding of green projects. Actually, our journey started, if you look to the right, left on my slides, you will see that in 2012, our government, through the Department of Environmental Affairs, gave us a facility of around 1.1 billion to manage for them, just to kickstart the funding of green projects. And then in 2014, again, the GPSA was accredited by the Global Environmental Facility Funding, and we have a facility that we manage with them, and it's still ongoing since 2014. So in 2016, as indicated, the GPSA then entered into negotiations to try and get accreditation through the GCF, and that was successfully concluded in 2016. Then in 2017, leading on to 2018, we then started the discussion for the Green Climate Facility. So the Green Climate Facility is modeled on the Green Bank concept, and it's the first of its kind on the African continent, we are proud to say. And it supports, first of all, the GPSA's commitment to promote the United Nations SDGs, as well as the country's own NDCs. So these countries, as I have indicated, it's South Africa, Eswatini, Namibia, and Lesotho. So why the CFF? People would ask, why did we feel the urge to do this? For us in the community in which we operate as the DBSA, we face, the Southern African region faces significant climate mitigation and adaptation challenges, which are compounded by the socio-economic constraints relating to energy, to transport, and water sectors. So in the geographical area that covers, that the DBSA operates in, we cover more than 14 Southern African countries. And in these countries, more than 50% of the population is without access to clean, regular, and sustainable water, as well as electricity. Things that in the developed countries, people take for granted. Here, we actually have 50% of the population which does not have access at all to these resources. And then when we look at our main source of energy is largely driven by fossil fuel, which obviously we have to try and reduce. Also, when we just focus on South Africa itself, we also faced with the significant power constraints due to the deteriorating infrastructure of our operating operator, which is ESCOM. I think you have all heard of our woes in terms of the electricity constraints and the load shedding, which has been ongoing now for 4 years. So a facility like this will obviously encourage and enable individuals and companies to go off the grid. And as already alluded to, South Africa itself submitted to the NCDCs in, which is at the heart of the Paris Agreement in 2015. So those were the reasons why we felt compelled to try and look at another facility that would obviously promote green projects. And then for the DBSA, personally, as a bank, we also want to support our mandate of catalyzing third-party funding alongside our frontline divisions. We also want to support our green initiative and ESG commitments. And we also want to support the regional implementation of financial instruments that are developed by the Product Innovation Unit, the unit of which I head. So obviously there is all personal interest in there for us. So in terms of when we sat down and tried to conceptualize and design this facility, there were two key questions that needed to be answered. So one of the key questions was, do we set this up as a separate legal entity, or do we incorporate it within the GBSA? And then if we incorporate it within the GBSA, how do we ensure that the Green Bank would add value and not just continue with the GBSA business as usual? And then the other question that needed to be answered was, what were the capital constraints and requirements of the main capital providers? Because when we started initially, we were not only talking to GCF, but we were talking to other DFIs, both locally and internationally, to try and become part of this initiative. So we also had to give consideration to their criteria that they set in terms of putting in, investing their capital. So what then happened was in March 2018, Convergence, thank you very much, Convergence, awarded a design funding grant to the CGC to support the design of the CFF. So these are our key partners that helped us as a bank in trying to set this, to design and set this product. So first of all, it was obviously the Coalition for Green Capital, CGC, the Green Cape Climate Works Foundation, and Convergence partners. And as already indicated, Convergence are the ones that actually provided the grant funding to CGC to sort of carry out the market study, so that we needed to prove to GCF that there is market demand for such a product. So the critical elements for us to obtain GCF approval, they needed a validation that there is a market and there is a need for this product, which we conducted with the grant that was provided by Convergence. And we relied heavily on Green Cape, who provided the market intelligence. They are a leader in Southern Africa market in terms of providing market intelligence for green products. And then in the end, we then managed to obtain approval from DBSA, $55 million, which is rand equivalent, of course, and from GCF also approved 55 million. So then we started with an initial capital of 110 million. And in addition, both DBSA and GCF each contributed $610,000 in grants to fund the setup costs for this initiative. So the capital structure and operating structure, currently, as indicated, our anchor funders is obviously Green Climate Fund and the DBSA. I keep on repeating that. And then the executing entity is the Development Bank of Southern Africa, which is accredited by GCF. And then our aim obviously is to catalyze the private investment through partnering with commercial banks, with other development finance institutions, and of course with private developers and private business sponsors and corporate companies who are also required to contribute their own equity into the deals that we'll be funding. And then just continuing on the governance and operating model. So GCF board approved this facility in October 2018. And then between GCF and DBSA, we then concluded a funded activity agreement, FAA, which was signed on the 22nd of August 2019. And then the FAA created a trust, and GCF has appointed DBSA as a trustee to manage those assets. And then CFF, that trustee is actually registered with the Master of High Court here in South Africa. And then the DBSA's investment committee and the board committee structures, they provide the oversight over the operation. So the question that I asked earlier in terms of how do we set it up in terms of legal constitution, we then decided to go with setting it up as part of a division inside the DBSA. This was promoted by the fact that GCF wanted to ensure that they can only provide funding or partner with an institution that they have accredited, of which DBSA was already accredited. So that was the drive there. So this facility is housed under the Product Innovation Unit, which is supported by our Climate Finance Unit, which offers us the technical support as we do the due diligence. And then in addition,
we are running out of time a bit, and I need to ask you to leave it here because
okay.
we're already running out of time. I'm sorry to have to be a strict enforcer of time, but I do, of course, want to leave enough time for the two other presenters. Thank you for that presentation. I can tell you that out of Convergence, we're so incredibly pleased that our 2018 design grant helped nudge this along. And so really wonderful that this is now up and running. If I could ask you to stay on, Spiwe, and also invite at this point Leo Park to join us in what is now a relatively short panel discussion. Leo is the Financial Institutions Manager and Corporate Sustainability Officer at GCF's private sector facility. And while he joins, let me just ask you, I've kept a keen eye on the questions that come in over the WOFA platform. People ask about intersectionality. And Spiwe, one particular question is, obviously this is all about energy transition, climate mitigation, adaptation, and investing across Southern Africa in a range of sectors where the need is greatest. How do you weave considerations, important considerations like gender equality into your investment program?
Thank you. Oh, okay, I thought you were going to go through all the questions. Thank you for that question. So as part of the discussion that I did not have to manage to get to, we developed a criteria which was obviously approved by GCF. In that criteria, we have set certain minimum requirements that we need to see achieved on a project by project basis in terms of gender equality. First of all, at an operational level of an entity. Secondly, in terms of employment within those institutions. And thirdly, in terms of them being beneficiaries to the services that will be provided or funded through this CFF.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Rob, if I may supplement.
Please, Leo, go ahead.
Thank you, Rob. Again, very nice to meet you all. It's just past the midnight in Korea, but trying to stay awake. So just to supplement the gender part, so for every GCF project, the accredited entities such as DBSA, they must develop 2 documents that include a gender action plan and gender strategy. So they have to clearly articulate how they're going to consider the gender equality in every financing activity that involves GCF proceeds. And one example I can give you, this is not relevant to the DBSA CFF, but we have done one transaction in Mongolia with Hasbank. And we have provided more concessional funding to MSMEs that are either owned or led by women, because we wanted to, since they are mostly more vulnerable to climate change, according to many studies out there. So we wanted to help them by providing more concessional funding. So that's again one of the instruments that we can offer to make sure that we can maximize the impacts on the gender side.
Leo, I wanted to ask you from a GCF perspective. Obviously, this is a big commitment, and it's a daring commitment to set up essentially a new green bank climate facility. What was the rationale for GCF to support the climate finance facility? And what are your thoughts on the opportunity to replicate this type of setup elsewhere in other countries and regions, perhaps for other sectors?
Sure, that's a great question. I think we really became very interested in this whole green bank concept since we got to know about this green bank network that consists of many members around the world, including those from the US and other parts of the world, etc. And one of our partners, which is Tata Venture Capital, they just became the member of a green bank network. So we really like the concept because one of the key strengths of having this type of facility or institution is to mobilize private sector investments at scale. Because if you look at the track record of green bank network members, the private sector mobilization is close to 3 times. And this is something that we wanted to achieve. So it was we were very glad when DBSA came forward by partnering with the Convergence as well as others. And CPI as well, and I think that's when their first kind of project idea was endorsed by the Climate Lab, and that's how we got to know about this project. And we of course work very closely with the Coalition for Green Capital. So we of course decide to domicile this facility within DBSA for CFF, but our actually next green bank project will be a fully-fledged new institution to be set up in Mongolia. You might be able to see the full project document on Monday because that's our publication day. And so that will be our very first project setting up a new institution. So where we'll be having equal shareholding with the government of Mongolia, and there's consortium of private sector banks and GCF. So we believe that this kind of model will provide good example for others to try to replicate. And we don't want to stop there. So we are trying to be very opportunistic. So we are again trying to engage with as many interested parties as possible.
Yep, no, that's great to hear. Thanks so much, Leo. And good to hear that the idea is being replicated as we speak. Just back to Spiva for a moment. You talked about a leverage ratio. Of course, this is incredibly important. This is all about mobilizing private sector capital into climate finance. The objective was a 1-to-3, perhaps even 1-to-5 ratio. Perhaps early days, but let me ask you, how has it worked out so far in the portfolio as it builds up?
So far, we are seeing great market interest. I think on our pipeline, we currently have 6 deals that we are looking at seriously. One of them has already been approved by the board of directors, and we will start dispersing soon, hopefully. So unfortunately, there was a bit of delay due to the impact of COVID. First of all, South Africa has been under lockdown since March this year. So that somehow curtailed our ability to market, to go on project due diligence. We have just now been allowed now to start with those activities. So we are hoping to soon start now and try and chase this business pipeline. But even under lockdown, we have managed to create a very interesting pipeline. And as indicated, I mean, we are very much, that leveraging or catalyzation initiative is at the forefront. So we are really looking at it between 3 to 5 times of every US dollar that we'll invest.
Thank you. Well, of course, the whole world follows this with great interest to see how this works out and how much private sector capital can be mobilized and how fast it can be. It is unfortunately time for us to move on to the second half of our program at this time. But I thank you, Spiva and Leo. Thank you so much for this brief panel discussion. I think we fleshed out some very important elements. So thank you very much. I'd like to now pivot to Enes Ramawi, and would invite him to turn on his audio and video. He is the founder and managing director of Catalyst Investment Management, and he'll talk to us about the Catalyst MENA Clean Energy Fund 2. And so Enes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here, and we really thank Convergence and GCF for all the great work they're doing, and very inspiring to hear about DBSA as well. think South Africa has been a model in some sense for us here in West Asia, North Africa. So we're focused on Middle East, North Africa, and the Middle East, of course, in West Asia, North Africa, above the Sahara. And we were the first to launch a renewable energy and energy efficiency fund back in 2016. Before that, we were an energy and water venture capital. This is one of the water scarcest regions of the world, the water poorest. Over 50% of global desalination capacity, water desalination, is in the MENA region. In terms of energy, it's known for being a significant energy exporter, but that's for certain privileged countries of the region. Half the countries, 2/3 of the countries in the MENA region import their fuel, and therefore energy is a big challenge. And we've been late as a region to move on the path of market price of energy, and therefore energy efficiency and renewable energy. So, which represents an opportunity. I also want to mention that in the region, in addition to what kind of the have-nots, the non-energy exporters, their economic position, we also have a significant refugee and migration problem, which we know spills over into Europe, and it further reinforces the need for job creation, gender equality, economic development. So I wanted to highlight these as I began. I'll introduce you to somewhat of the market, what we're doing in the region, and appreciate the opportunity. So we're actually raising our follow-on fund. Our current fund has been doing well. We're fully deployed across Jordan and Egypt, mainly into solar PV projects, both private sector and government projects. We were the first in 2014 to sign we were first of a group of developers to sign regionally a private sector utility scale PPA with the government. And we were the first to sign a private sector corporate PPA. This was in 2016. So our claim to fame is also being on the front line or on the edge, being more creative, because we come from more of an entrepreneurial background as opposed to a pure financial background. And then that's why we see a lot of synergy with GCF. We like to think out of the box and kind of break barriers regionally and even outside of the region. This region has less than 3% renewable energy penetration, where targets are well over 30%. There's significant growth, over 10 times growth in renewables for the region. In our view, renewables have to be coupled with energy efficiency. They have to be covered with adaptation and cross-cutting programs. So it is a significant market, and we are talking to GCF's equity team about participating with us as well in this follow-on fund. They've been extremely supportive, and we're grateful to their support. Management team, and what's nice about energy and fund management and advisory work is that you can have a pretty high ratio of females on the team. So we have over 30% of the team are females, and 20% of management are females, and we're proud about that. This largely reflects our current portfolio for our current fund. Our new fund will be more bold. Now that solar is more established in the region, we'll be doing more in energy storage. And energy storage allows for both off-grid communities to be fully supported almost 24/7. From our studies, solar plus long-term storage can provide over 80% energy of the energy needs, electricity needs for a community. So for us, the concept of what we call, base load solar is close. It's about 5 to 10 years away, and we hope that with our work in this area, we can accelerate it. And that's where we're looking at some blended financing as well. In terms of impact, certainly, for each $1 million of investment, we have over 3 megawatts. As the cost of a megawatt is going down, this number will almost double in our follow-on fund. Significant emissions avoided, clean energy generated, and mobilized capital. This is fund terms, relatively standard for the industry. We want to talk about the markets. On the left, you have the oil importers, the poor countries, and on the right, the rich countries. And as it turns out, of course, the poor countries work with a market price of energy. So they end up moving faster when it comes to renewable energy and energy efficiency, because they can make decisions based on real market price. The wealthier countries were slower to move with renewables because they subsidized energy locally. Although now several are beginning with very, very large programs, the real market leaders ended up being mainly Jordan and Morocco. Morocco first, then Jordan. Morocco in wind, Jordan in solar PV. We're happy to be based in Jordan, where we benefited from being the most mature market in solar PV, and we're taking these learnings to other markets. If you look at the growth, overall GDP growth, it's a young region, population over 50% is below the age of 25. Electricity consumption is increasing. Electricity intense product usage like air conditioning is becoming more common. That's a big driver. So solar is becoming a big part of the future mix. Again, we see 10 times growth in renewables from 3% to over 30 in the next years. If we take just solar PV alone, you see the growth from 2018, 2 gigawatts to 15 gigawatts next year. You see 225, 31 to over 200 thereafter, so 7 times growth. So we're in a region that's experiencing significant growth. Keep in mind, this is with solar just being there for 25% of the time, the capacity factor for solar. If we add storage to the equation, we get a 4 times, 3 times increase in the market potential. And it will reach prices that are competitive with conventional energy. We're trying to accelerate that. Country by country, each country has its own program and is at its own pace. And the benefit of us having been based in Jordan, which has been the most mature in solar PV, is that we can see what will happen next in the other countries that have just started more recently with their solar PV programs. And that's why we're already looking to solar and storage. Management team, all based in Jordan, diverse team, diverse educations for the team. Core countries, what we call the primary markets, Levant, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia. But of course, we're focused on the broader circle. We're looking at opportunities in Djibouti, sub-Saharan Africa on an opportunistic basis, as well as West Asia and the Levant. We're there to fund opportunities that we call our non-standard. So not just the standard projects that in many cases have equity providers, but the non-standard projects, which are a bit more complex, a bit riskier, but more breakthrough and higher impact. And in terms of exits, and investors always want to understand the exit situation. In the market, it's been very active in terms of secondary buyers. And typically what a organization like us does is aggregate multiple projects and seek to exit multiple projects, but we are seeing that there is the opportunity to build an exit platform publicly listed. That way we have more capital mobilized, retail investors potentially, and that's a potential exit vehicle that we're ready to create. In terms of the pipeline, it's pretty diversified across geography. Oh, this is existing portfolio, excuse me, and just shows our deployment of our current fund over time. This is how we monitor our projects. This is a specific project, and we look at energy generated versus plan, efficiency versus plan, EBITDA, cash flows, etc. In our pipeline, we always like to be looking at opportunities that are non-standard, and that means the next wave. And for us, the next wave is renewables with storage for potentially round the clock electricity, whether it's in communities, decentralized, off-grid, or it's utility scale. We're also looking at solar plus water desalination and water treatment. Over 50% of the cost of cleaning or treating water is energy. And we're also looking at solar thermal at industrial and commercial scales. In terms of impact, we're members of the various standards organizations and quantify impact across the various SDGs with policies and processes to support that. including a specific impact related to the projects that we've invested in. And those primarily are SDGs 7, 13, and 17. And thank you very much.
Terrific, Anis. Thank you so much for taking us through an incredible amount of material in quite a breezy fashion. I commend you for your presentation style. Thank you, much appreciated. We do have questions for you, but we'll save them for the Q&A toward the end. And I'd like now to again pivot to Alison Archambault. So please turn on your audio and video if you wouldn't mind, Alison. Alison is the president for EarthSpark International. She'll present on her organization's important work in Haiti. Alison, I promised you 11:42, and here we are, 11:42. And the floor is all yours.
Amazing. Thank you very much. My name is Alison Archambault. I'm with EarthSpark International. And I am thrilled to say that we are going to be presenting here a project that is GCF backed with $9.9 million. It's microgrids in Haiti, but before I get to that project, I want to give a little bit of context in what we've been doing in Haiti for the last 12 years. EarthSpark is a nonprofit. We're working on solving energy poverty. And in order to do that, we are incubating business models that can solve aspects of energy poverty in specific contexts. We focus on what can work in Haiti, but we pull in global best practices, and our solutions oftentimes are relevant in other parts of the world. So far, we spun off 3 companies. One is Énergie Poip, that's Creole for clean energy, and it's a local Haitian microgrid operations company. The second company we spun off is SparkMeter. It's a technology and services provider. It builds and sells smart meters and grid analytics. That company's now sold 100,000 meters in 25 different countries. And we use it in Haiti for our grids. And the third company is the microgrid development company, Participant Power. Everything that we're doing is working on trying to build an ecosystem of enterprises that can solve energy poverty in a way that makes sense. We talk about what we're doing as proving what is possible. Back in 2014, before we turned on our solar-powered smart grid in rural Haiti, we got a lot of pushback on thinking too big, and nobody thought that smart meters were relevant. Everybody thought that the percentage of solar we were pushing was crazy, and now it's pretty industry standard. De-risking by doing, again, there's a lot of thought that can go into how best to make the energy transition happen. And we believe that we have to use project-based change, do all the studying we can, and then get out there and build things to understand how best to build things. And moving microgrids towards market. Notice that it's towards market, and let's just go back and appreciate that all energy systems that serve populations are in some way subsidized. So it's not like we're going to build the next 20 microgrids in Haiti and then Wall Street's going to come in and solve this problem. But that's why this is a blended finance session. And blended finance is so important, not only in these early days of energy access, but in the overall system of electricity. Let us pause to remember that electricity is subsidized, energy is subsidized in different ways around the world, and it should continue to be so. It's a social compact. So I think this is a very sophisticated audience, but what is a microgrid? Microgrids are electricity systems, generation, distribution, poles and wire infrastructure that deliver electricity to towns. That's how we define it. And we've so far built 2 of these microgrids in rural Haiti. And just to, again, zoom into the details here, families are saving huge amounts of money when they get electricity for the first time. Here's a picture of a woman holding up her child to pull on the switch to turn on light in their house, electric light in their house for the first time. And imagine that. And also that family is saving 80% of their energy budget compared to what they had been spending on kerosene and candles and third-party phone charging. Businesses too. I mean, we talk a lot about the economic benefits, and we really need to build infrastructure that can power motors and run refrigeration and really unlock the pent-up potential in these rural economies. And when a business can go from buying its own diesel and managing its own generation, it's incredibly expensive, to lower cost electricity, it also, again, builds rural resilience and is good for the local economies. And we have a huge opportunity in doing this. I appreciated the question earlier on the gender aspect, because we are building electricity systems from scratch. And that means we get to define power systems. That's both electricity, and it's also energy governance. It's who's working on these lines. It's who is the face of electricity in these communities. And because the arrival of electricity is so transformative for a community in general, it's also an incredible opportunity for the gender dynamics to also shift, because the pie is growing so much that nobody's getting a smaller slice of a pie when you increase the roles of women and girls. So to the project. The project is to build 22 new microgrids. We have 2, we're gonna do 22 more in the next 5 years. We're quite excited. And the way this is going to look is that we're going to take the money and put it into public-private partnerships at the local level. So working very closely with the municipal governments as well as the national government here. Then Energy Poop, if you remember, is the local company. They do the operations and the maintenance. We have one of the local teams pictured here. They're the face of electricity in the community, and they're the ones doing all of the on-the-ground maintenance and customer service. And then using Spark Meter technology, we have local vendors, and we're able to see with very nice grid analytics how the system is doing, what the system is needing, and to be able to conduct transactions. Our systems tend to be prepay, so we can dramatically reduce our operations cost while also increasing our overall payment efficiency compared to many other grids. How are we doing this? Blended finance. It was 3 years ago I checked when the GCF private sector facility emailed us from the Convergence platform saying, hey, there's an RFP. Would you be interested? So we were thrilled to go through the RFP process, find NEFCO as an accredited entity partner, and now move forward through the board approval, working towards getting this project all secured. So we do have the GCF funding lined up now. Who else? There are some incentives coming from the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank and others through the government of Haiti. It's coming in as grant equivalent, and it's basically connection incentives. We're also looking for senior debt. So with GCF funding, I should have said, is coming in the form of grant funding and in the form of concessionary debt funding. So we can crowd in other funders on the senior debt and on equity side. EarthSpark itself obviously has been working on this, and for the last 10 years, we bring 2 microgrids and all of the pre-development and development of these grids so far. And we're reaching out to debt and equity and grant providers to complete the picture. And here's a picture, sort of a map of how all the different entities relate to each other. Participant Power has launched a special purpose vehicle just for this project. So it's project finance for these next 22 grids, plus the 2 that exist. And we're looking for folks to come in either directly into Participant Power, Haiti 1, the SPV, or into Participant Power itself. We have $14 million signed up with the equity and the GCF funds that we have coming in. Hopefully soon I'll be able to share a number. We don't actually know it yet on what the incentives are going to be from the World Bank or what the concession number we're going to have in this current round of concession grants that we're in. And zooming out here, this is what we're working on. This is a picture of a woman cooking with electricity for the first time. We are continuing to push on the R&D side of business models that can work as EarthSpark, so that we can prove what is possible again, and build stronger business models for microgrids in rural Haiti, and also making that a model for around the world. And I think, and as you mentioned this a little bit, but we do have an opportunity when we're building infrastructure from scratch to leap directly to today's best practices, to today's business models, to today's technologies. And there is a lot of opportunity to build better systems when we're building systems from scratch that can then inform how the other grids of the world work. So demand side management, distributed energy resources. We are doing solar plus storage as 100% of our generation. So solar plus storage plus smarts to hurry the transition. And I did want to point out, there are a couple of calls to action here. We need to move really quickly on this. 3 years is a long time to be talking about our great project, to get the financing involved. We need to move fast. We also need to be aware that we need to move slow. We can't say that we're going to build 80 grids tomorrow, because we just can't. It takes time to do the work in these communities. And so, I feel like I'm constantly, being pulled in either direction to go, drag a process forward or to move more quickly. And we need to be very thoughtful about what is possible. We need to put all of our energy into it. And hopefully the institutions can help the little entities like us do the work, which is slow, real, hard work in these communities, to make sure that we have the local governance structures and all the community engagement moving forward in the way that it needs to for these to be successful. That's the end of my presentation. I would love to hear from anybody, or if anybody has any thoughts on folks who'd be interested in joining us, I would love to be in touch. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alison, for a inspired and inspiring presentation. And again, you kept the pace, which I much appreciate. We now have a few minutes left for a Q&A, and I wanted to ask Alison to stay on with video and audio, but also invite Ennis and Spiwa and Leo to come back on audio and video. I've been thinking a bit how to get the most out of our remaining 7 minutes, which is not a small challenge. There are questions certainly on WOFA, but what I really wanted to do is go a little philosophical on all of you and ask each of you just one question. And I guess the math indicates that you'd have about a minute and a half or 2 minutes to answer, so it needs to be quite succinct. And the question is this: we all talk about climate change mitigation, adaptation, energy transition, real deep work on the ground, intersectionality in terms of objectives. But when it comes to blended finance, which is not sort of the whole answer for all of the commercial capital that we hope to mobilize, it's a tool, a critical tool, we think, in a toolbox. But when we think about blended finance, there are 3 aspects. You've got return, you've got impact, you've got leverage. The question really is, how can we do a better job as a community to use that concessional capital that we've got or hope to get, and mobilize far more private sector capital than we currently do. We're moving along very nicely. We're talking about billions, but obviously we need to take a slightly different view and perhaps change tactics and go much larger, go much different, because we need to get eventually to trillions every year. So Alison, let me start with you. What do we need to do to get there?
Well, there's the tactical, and then there's the zoom out version. I'll go, tactical, let's get first loss funding in, let's get forgivable grants that can turn, be like equity, but people are honest about what the risks are and what the opportunities are. So, there are big financial opportunities on these if we fundamentally change the way the world works, right? Let's also zoom out and ask, what's the point of what we're trying to do collectively? And our systems aren't really set up for making sure everybody has what they need. And it would be great if we had a little bit more of a first principles approach to what is the point of all of this? Are we trying to get double-digit returns in the system that exists, or are we trying to make sure that the world is a world in which people can thrive? I think that's a question we need to ask.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Sometimes the best approach to issues is to first get the question framed correctly. Spiva, what is your perspective? How do we go really big? Certainly CCF is a great step, early days still. How do we do this?
For us, really, it's also less about returns than about sustainability. And then the challenge that we face in Africa is obviously project preparation and training, mentoring of developers and business people who can then go around and implement projects. So we are looking for more risky capital for proof of concept, for training, for mentoring. So for us, really, that's the key. Yeah.
And as what is your perspective? I mean, you operate in MENA, which some people call a very hot zip code. Never easy to do business. Certainly not with things that are relatively new that require capital, very capital intensive. How can we go big from your perspective?
I love what Alison said earlier on, de-risking by doing, and I think that. The model we've all seen, whether it's the US venture capital industry, where the Small Business Administration matched investors dollar for dollar for VC funds until the VC industry took off, and then the private sector ran with it. That's a huge case study success story. In renewables, really the German government was one of the leaders in subsidizing solar power to get the industry going. You had economies of scale and volumes, and then today it's commercially viable. China supported that, other countries supported that. So I think it takes a lot of passion and focus, and then a lot of capital, ideally governments that are focused in the right direction to make what isn't feasible today, but can be feasible, will be feasible tomorrow, but is healthy tomorrow, meaning socially positive, high impact, focus on those things and accelerate the feasibility of those things. And so to us, certainly it depends sector by sector, but what we're looking at, which is round the clock power from solar to displace conventional power plants fully. Today, solar is there, storage isn't. So we need to bridge that gap. And it's about a 10-year gap, 7-year gap. So if it can be bridged and we get those big case studies, the de-risking by doing, then we accelerate the timeline. And that's the approach.
Thank you, Anders. You provide me with a perfect segue to ask the same question of Leo. And Leo, as representative of our eventual host, gets the last word. Leo, of course, GCF is set up to do exactly what's just been described. How do you see the future, and how can we go big? Do we need to do things differently?
Sure. So thank you. I mean, it's a very challenging question. I think, first of all, GCF needs to deliver. If we look at our portfolio, our estimate in terms of private sector leverage is about 3.5 times, but it's never going to be enough. And GCF is supposed to be the largest client fund in the world with around 17 billion pledges and commitments from donor countries, but it's really less than a drop in the ocean. And I think putting more public money will not solve the problem. So the only way to go big is really to engage with the private sector investors, the super riches, for example. I mean, these guys spend I don't know how much to send men to Mars, right? But we really need to engage with them. And I'm sure they are doing a great job. But by partnering with this type of private sector investors, I think that's the only way might not be the only way, but I think it is probably the most workable way to go big. But I think to do that, first of all, GCF needs to deliver and demonstrate to the world that this type of business model can work and can really mobilize private sector investments.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. Well, with that, unfortunately, we do come to the end of this session. It feels like we could have done another hour and would have had a very interesting conversation, but this is all we've got. And Leo, you're at 1 a.m. Seoul time. It's midnight in Manila. The others have a slightly easier time in their day. So first of all, to GCF, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to host this Convergence side event. Much appreciated. I want to thank all of our presenters for doing such a wonderful job and actually also sticking to the very tight time frame that I've given you. And also, of course, thank you, audience, for all of your interest, your engagement, your participation, and the great questions that we've seen pass by. The video recording of this session will be posted after the event on WOFA and later on the GCF website. Of course, on behalf of GCF, we'd invite you to access other sessions and side events of the conference and explore the virtual networking features available on WOFA. You can, of course, access the list of participants, establish direct connections, create meetups, or just have virtual coffee breaks with others. So thank you very much again. Stay safe and have a great day and a great night. Thank you.